Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics. 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. We are going to have a fantastic show tonight. I am very fortunate because I have a guest I respect greatly. Her work fascinates me. Kathleen Marden is a brilliant author. She truly is one of, if not the, world authority on UFO contact. Her books and lectures are amazing. She has essays also that have been placed in other pieces of literature that you would enjoy greatly. Her website is www.kathleen-marden.com. You'll find that on the Fate Mag Radio page. And if you are not familiar with her work, you're missing out. She is a regression hypnosis expert. She also practices Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique, which I found fascinating when we met and were able to discuss it. She is the director of the Sacred Pathway Center for Hypnosis and Spiritual Enlightenment. She is also the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, who were the couple with the first documented close encounter and subsequent abduction. She is a generational experiencer herself. She is actually one of the most interesting people I have been able to talk to in the field of ufology. And I am fortunate enough to have spoken with a lot of people who have experienced as well as researched this field. And Kathleen Marden, I am so thankful that you're here, and welcome to Fate Mag Radio.
Thank you so much, Kat. It's great to be with you.
Well, I am very excited because I enjoyed so much getting to meet and have conversations with you when we were in Phoenix.
And I enjoyed it as well.
And I have to tell you that your new book is fantastic. As I was reading through it, when I got home, I was just taking notes and taking notes and taking notes. And of course, it is not sitting right in front of my face, but that will be fixed here in just a moment. I am curious, when you had familial generational experiences with UFO contact, did you anticipate your life as a researcher and, quite frankly, just an expert person to come this path?
I did not. I never intended to choose this path. In fact, I started out in psychiatric social work. That is what I studied in college. And then I ended up going down the path of education because my first husband was studying for his doctorate at the University of Cincinnati. And I tried to get a job in a psychiatric hospital there. And they did not want to hire this little 5-foot-tall New Hampshire farm girl. They thought I would be injured. And so, of all things, I ended up getting a teaching job in the inner city of Cincinnati. So
no danger there.
There was a danger there as well.
Goodness.
In fact, one time when I was going into the school in the morning, there was a gun battle going on next door. Another day, I went out to my car. I had a red Ford Mustang convertible in that time frame. And I went out to get into my car, and all 4 wheels were gone. So,
like literally gone, like they had put you on blocks?
Yes.
Oh, my word.
But, that was life in the inner city of Cincinnati. I have to say, I look back on it as the most challenging, yet the most rewarding teaching position that I ever held. So, but that is where I started off. I did graduate work in education, and I worked in that field for many years. But then one day I was struck down, and I overnight had a debilitating illness that left me bedridden. And I was ill for many, many months. I couldn't go back to work. I wasn't certain that I was completely recovered, but I longed for intellectual stimulation. I loved my job. I had been working on setting up model programs in education. And what I thought of was my Aunt Betty Hill. And I had always wanted to investigate her case myself. I wanted to examine all of the skeptics' arguments against the reality of that case, and I wanted to line those up against the evidence. I wanted to do my own investigation. So over the next several years, I it ended up being 14 years in all, I investigated that case. I did archival research on that case, and my illness would permit me to do so. And finally, after Betty's death in 2005, I had written the first draft to a manuscript for a book on that case. And my aunt knew that I was going to be doing this. And she said to me, Kathy, if you ever have any difficulty with this, if you ever have any questions, go to Stanton Friedman. She said, I trust him implicitly. And he was the scientist who was so involved in the star map investigation on Betty's case. And so I did walk up to Stanton it was about 2005, I believe, at that point. We were at a symposium, and I would go to his vendor table between lectures, and he was always surrounded by a large group of men who were very actively engaging him in conversation. And I'm so small, he definitely couldn't see me, and I couldn't get in. And eventually I would just give up and go back to the next lecture. Well, at the end of the day, I was ready to give up and say, the universe isn't with me on this one. I'll have to do this without ever asking him for assistance. But I went to his table, and he was just packing up the few books that he had left to take home. And I asked him if I could speak with him about the book that I was writing. And he said to me, have you had dinner yet? And I said, no. And he said, let's go into the restaurant and we'll sit down and we'll talk about it. Well, several hours later, he told me that he was very interested in participating in the book and that he wanted to visit my home in New Hampshire. I lived in Stratham, New Hampshire at the time, and to look at the archival collection, to read my manuscript, and to talk about the direction I was taking the book in and whether or not he would decide to join me. So November of that year came, and we had been communicating via email a little bit in that time frame, but he finally had time to drive down to my home. He spent several days with me. I believe it was about 4 days with me. And we went over everything that I had in the collection and the manuscript and talked for hours on end. I was completely exhausted after that. And he finally said that he was going to join me in this book because I was being scientific and I was being unbiased. And I was very pleased to have him because he was a published author. He was very well known in the field. He'd established himself early on. His first lecture was in 1968. So this was many years later. He was probably the leading ufologist in the world at that time. I considered myself to be very lucky to have his guidance.
And his friendship.
And his friendship.
That was a very special man.
He was, and we wrote 3 additional books together because we found out that we thought alike in many ways. He as a physical scientist, me from the perspective of social science. and we made a very good team. So it was a true joy to work with him for 14 years.
I'll bet there were some precious moments involved in that, though. You're both very knowledgeable in your fields. We're both strong personalities.
Yes.
And
we're both Leos.
Oh, dear. Well, then I know that there were interesting moments.
There were definitely interesting moments. And you know, we felt blessed that we were both Leos because we truly understood one another. And I think that we're both compassionate people, but we have a great deal of insight. We're deep thinkers. And it was such a joy to do archival research together and to examine documents that were given to him that were allegedly government UFO documents, and to go through those documents and discuss them privately at symposiums or symposia when at night after we were finished for the day. And we accomplished a great deal of work. We edited our books together during that time frame. And I have to tell you, one time, it had been a wonderful conference, and it had come to an end, and we were just reading email together. And I had received a notice that Marjorie Fish, who was the brilliant woman from Ohio, who vetted, who actually was able to identify the stars on my Aunt Betty Hill's star map, the one that she had seen on board the craft, and that Dr. Benjamin Simon had suggested that she would draw if she could remember it accurately and if it didn't trouble her too much. And she did remember it. And it was published in the first book that was ever written about their case way back in 1966, really before any of the scientific work was done on it.
Yes.
And Marjorie thought that if this place did exist in our solar system, that she would be able to find or identify the stars on that star map. She had to go to the university. There were no computers to use in those days. She sat at the university and hand copied all of the distance data on the stars and all of the characteristics of the stars out 55 light years in all directions from our sun. And then she started building three-dimensional models using monofilament line.
Good
and
heavens.
Beads of various sizes and colors to represent the stars in that volume of space. In one of her models, she had 256 stars in their proper location. She did an extraordinary amount of work, and imagine the math that was involved in knowing where to place each star. She wasn't looking at a map, just putting stars in. And
that is astounding.
Still, in 1971, she didn't have a match. But in early 1972, a new catalog was released, and it had different distance data. She went home. She constructed another model using that distance data. And she had a nearly precise match for Betty's star map. And then the problem was, how could she find scientists to vet her work for accuracy? And so Coral Lorenzen, who was co-director of APRO, the wonderful UFO investigation organization back in that time frame, contacted Stanton Friedman, who was still working as a nuclear physicist, I believe, in that time frame. And she asked him if he would be willing to look for scientists, for astrophysicists who had PhDs to vet Marjorie's work. Stanton did, and he was able to locate 2 astrophysicists and 1 statistician. And they vetted Marjorie's work, and it was accurate.
Oh my goodness. Do you know, we are at our first break right now. The time has flown because this is fascinating to me. But we will be right back, and we will continue this with Kathleen Marden.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
To the believer, the evidence is overwhelming. To the skeptic, there will never be enough. Hello everyone. Join Kevin and Jennifer Malik, the host of Paraversal Universe, every Friday here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on WCET FM and The Rift. Log on or tune in as they check out the mysteries found within the 8 categories of the unknown and unexplained, including ghosts and haunted places, aliens and UFOs, theology and mythology, cryptids and monsters, urban legends and folklore, conspiracies, metaphysics, and forbidden archaeology. Listen as Kevin and Jennifer interview the top minds in their respective fields as they share theories and information regarding these unsolved mysteries. For future show and archive information, one can find Paraversal Universe on Facebook, Twitter, and MeWe under various Paraversal Universe headings. So, for excellent talk radio about the unknown and unexplained, check out Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply. Brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society, LTD, and produced by WBHM-DB.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. 23 minutes after the hour, and we are back here on Fate Mag Radio with Kathleen Marden. And Kathleen, we were discussing the star map and the research going into the validation of Marjorie's research.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say that of the stars on Betty's map, some of them were connected by solid lines indicating that they were trade routes, and others were connected by dotted lines. Now, the special properties that these stars had is that all of the stars on Betty's map that were connected by solid lines are sun-like stars. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space were on Betty's map, even though only 5% of the stars in that part of our galactic neighborhood are considered sunlight. It was extraordinary. It was way beyond chance.
Well, obviously.
And yet there were skeptics who claimed that you could throw marbles into a sand pile and you'd be able to identify those stars. But they didn't understand and they didn't appreciate the work, the extraordinary work that Marjorie had done. This was extraordinary when I think about the geometry of placing every star in its proper location in a three-dimensional model. That map has just been updated recently by an astrophysicist who, and if you go to my website at Kathleen-Marden.com, right on my homepage, you'll scroll down and there is a link to that video on YouTube. So that is very good. It's a computer-generated model now. But I was talking about one of my memories with Stanton as we were going through our email messages at the end of a conference. I received a message that Marjorie was deceased. Unfortunately, she had Alzheimer's near the end of her life and spent many years in a facility. That happens to a lot of brilliant people, I understand.
Well, it does, and it's no less tragic, no matter who you are, but it just seems that is so unfair.
Yes, and the person who wrote that to me was an individual who was telling me that Marjorie, and making public to all of the news media, that Marjorie had stated that her work was not accurate, and she had conceded that although she tried her hardest, she was wrong. That is absolutely false. Yet that information was given to the news media.
Oh, my word.
And it went out initially by the head of the funeral parlor. And he did not know the correct information on that. Stanton was furious. I've never seen him so angry because he put so much time into this. He knew what a brilliant woman Marjorie was. He found the astrophysicist who said that her work was accurate. There was an extraordinary amount of work from all directions on this. And Stanton immediately went home and got in touch with Marjorie's niece, who found out what had happened and had told Stanton the mishaps, the incorrect information that was given regarding Marjorie's work. It was really tragic.
It is tragic and ridiculous for a funeral director to take it upon himself. I'm sure that's not his field of expertise.
No, not at all.
To do something of that nature. That's ridiculous.
It was. And Stanton pursued that, and he put out a paper that corrected that information. But still, I don't know if it really mattered because, once the big news release is broadcast, a lot of people don't listen to the correction.
That is very true.
But Stanton and I had many good years of work and research and joy together, working together at a vendor table where we had a lot of laughter and a lot of good times.
Well, people didn't always know just how wicked funny he was.
Oh, he was.
He's just and enjoyed yanking your chain.
He
every
had
so
a dry
often.
sense of humor. That was, he had me in hysterics a lot of times.
I could see that. You know, I was a great admirer of his, and I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to interview him more than once.
Mm-hmm.
And I will always be grateful because of his patience, his willingness to educate me about things that I was clueless on. He made sure that I didn't, look like a goof. And he was just a very special person. So
he absolutely was.
I know that y'all had an awful lot of years and an awful lot of good times together.
We did. I'll always cherish that.
Yes. Well, y'all actually wrote several books together aside from Captured, the story of your aunt and uncle's experience.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that to me was really an interesting concept because so many people knew when that happened to them. It was very well reported, but they didn't know details. And can we talk about the dress?
Yes, absolutely.
You know, when I met you in Phoenix and I was listening to you talk and listening to the different lectures and stuff, one thing that struck me as so very odd was the fact that when the Hills were abducted, the aliens did not know how to work a zipper. They couldn't undo her dress.
They couldn't.
That's astounding.
Her dress was torn in several locations and very perplexing. The top of the zipper had a 2-inch tear in the stitching. There was a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. The dress was torn from waist to hemline in the lining, and the hem was torn down on one side. And she had no memory of how this could have occurred. She put it into her closet knowing that it had to be repaired. The next time she took it out, it was covered with a pink powdery substance as well. Mm-hmm. She looked at the dress. She said, I wonder if I can salvage this. It was her favorite dress. She took it, she hung it on the clothesline, and the pink powder blew off it, but the dress was stained and pitted. And then she thought about throwing it away, but she kept it because she thought that it might hold a clue to who those people were that they encountered that night. Well, she and Barney underwent months of hypnotherapy with Dr. Benjamin Simon, a renowned psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And she remembered how her dress was torn under hypnosis. She and Barney found themselves on a dirt road after Barney had had a close encounter with this craft, hovering less than 100 feet above him. He could see the non-human entities dressed in black, shiny uniforms. He had conscious recall of this. Betty was seated in the car. The door had been left open. The interior light was on. And so Barney was looking up through binoculars, shaking his head and saying, it can't be true. Pinching himself to see if he was dreaming. He wasn't dreaming. He was face to face with a non-human entity. And suddenly, all but that one entity turned to the back side of the corridor that they were standing in. And their arms went up, and something started to slide out from what might have been sides of the craft, but it looked like it was oval, and little red lights on fins. And then something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. And Barney thought at that point that there was a plan, and that plan was to capture him. And he became extremely frightened. He ran for his life, pulling the binoculars away from his eyes so violently that he broke the strap. It was a leather strap. He threw the binoculars on the seat of the car, screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. Thus the name of my book. Mm-hmm. And he closed the door, but as he entered the car, he saw the craft coming in his direction. He told Betty to roll down the window and look up to see if she could see it above the car. It was a bright, light night. The moon was nearly full, but all she saw was blackness. She later realized she was looking at the underside of the craft, because within moments, she and Barney heard code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. The car vibrated, and a tingling sensation passed through their bodies. The next thing they knew, they found themselves on a new road, and they didn't know how they'd gotten there. They turned onto a dirt road, and there were men standing in the road. It was a roadblock of sorts, and they saw a red glow in the distance, which would have been the craft. The men started to approach Betty and Barney, and Barney said to Betty, "It's them. It's the ones I saw when I was standing in the field." And she became terrified. She opened the car door to flee into the woods. They intercepted her before she was able to do that. And Barney, knowing that he would be harmed if he didn't cooperate, or suspecting that he would, did cooperate. He opened his door and he stepped out. And they then escorted Betty and Barney down the path through the woods. They were reassuring them that they would not be harmed. They only needed to do a few simple tests. But Betty didn't believe them. As they went to take her onto the craft, she fought for her life, and she kicked the one who was beside her. And this is what caused her dress to tear from waist to hemline, and for the hem to be torn down. They took her, they intercepted her, they pointed something at her, and she lost consciousness momentarily. The next thing she knew, she was being taken into a room. It wasn't the same room that Barney was in. And she was placed on what was sort of like a dentist chair or a chaise lounge first. They did some tests on her. They very carefully examined her hands, her arms, her legs, her feet, her toes, looking at how the joints would bend, really checking out the muscular system and how the bones worked and bended. And then they placed her on a table. But before they did that, they removed her dress. And that is when the zipper was torn, because this examiner didn't know how to operate a zipper. Now, doesn't that seem strange that they wouldn't know how? Dr. Bruce Maccabee speculated that perhaps zippers were so far in their distant past that they had no memory of zippers. Or, maybe they just never developed zippers. Maybe they developed something else.
Obviously, but it just strikes me as so odd that they're interstellar travelers.
Yes.
And they can't work a zipper.
True. But they were able to work Barney's zipper. When the examiner finished with Betty, he went in and worked Barney's zipper to pull his trousers down. So he learned quite quickly.
Well, I'm sure that they were analytical and had examined her zipper.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there is nothing light about their experience. I cannot imagine being in their position, particularly as this was truly the first documented case. They didn't know of anything happening to someone else. They didn't know that that was even a possibility.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, they're being taken and violated. And
in a sense.
And that is what happened. I know that the part of the hypnosis session, just the little bit that I heard, was absolutely awful.
It was. Betty and Barney were deeply distressed by this. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. Mm-hmm. Here were these, what Barney called beings of a superior type, beings that were somehow not human. And they didn't know if they were going to be dissected, if they were going to be carried off to an alien zoo or an alien museum or whatever. They didn't know if they'd ever see their home, their family, their friends again. So I have a great appreciation for the terror that each of them experienced,
Absolutely.
Not being aware that this had ever happened to anyone else.
I just think that in hindsight, first of all, their vehicle was relocated.
Yes.
So that had to be so disconcerting. In addition to what Barney had already experienced and was feeling, that now their vehicle is relocated. They don't know where they are. They just know that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And now the same beings are taking them.
Yes.
And, we've got about a minute until we go to break, but I cannot fathom the experience that they had. That's just something that is mind-blowing.
It was sheer terror.
Yes, there's nothing else it could have been.
Until for Betty, she discovered that they were kind. When one took her pain away, when the examiner plunged a needle into her navel. And then she began to trust him. And that's when she conversed with him.
And I would like to cover that when we come back. This is going to be a shorter break. And thank you so much for being here. We will be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. It is 45 minutes after the hour, and we are having such a discussion. Kathleen Marden is my guest tonight, and we have just been discussing her aunt and uncle's abduction experience, and that would be Betty and Barney Hill. Kathleen has written several books, and the first that she wrote with Stanton Friedman was Captured, and that describes this experience. So if you are wanting to get that, it's available on Amazon. It's also available on Kathleen's website, kathleen-marden.com. But Kathleen, you said that that Betty was soothed, really, because her pain was taken away and she was being communicated with. Was this telepathically?
Yes, the communication was telepathic, yet she spoke about the examiner having an accent. So, I don't know, do you have she was hearing voices in her head, I guess, but she was not, when their mouth would move, what happened was words were not coming out. It was more of a mumbling sound. I can't make it myself. I'm human. I'm just trying to. It just doesn't work.
Right. We don't have that capability.
Right. But so, yes, there was telepathic communication with them. And when they finished Betty's examination, where they inserted the needle into her navel, and the pain was taken away, they also checked her nervous system, and they did the same procedure with Barney. And so there was only one examiner on the craft, and he or she, they felt that she might have been a female, went into the next room to work on Barney. Betty had lost her fear. And so she got dressed and she was looking around the room and she saw a book, what she called a book. It was not like any book she'd ever seen before. It's more like what we think of today as a tablet. Mm-hmm. And there were symbols embedded in the tablet. There were 6 rows of vertical symbols. In the year 2000, I asked her to sketch the symbols for me from memory, but I had been doing a type of interview with her that day where I was taking her through step by step what had happened. And it was almost hypnotic in the way that it was done. And so I asked her to draw that from memory if she possibly could after all of those years. And when I went back a week later, she had symbols sketched on paper for me. They were published for the first time in my book, Captured. And Dr. Don C. Donderi, who was a professor of psychology at McGill University, in 2004, had done a symbol study with Stuart Appel and Bud Hopkins, the great Bud Hopkins experiencer, researcher, and investigator, and hypnotist. And they had taken symbols that had been drawn by Bud's experiencers. They called them abductees in those days. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Donderi and Stuart Appel, Dr. Appel, transferred all of those symbols onto the same type of paper. And then Dr. Donderi's graduate students did an analysis on the symbols. Now, it wasn't just the symbols that Bud Hopkins people had drawn. They also had 2 separate groups. They had a group of graduate students, and they were hypnotized And it was suggested to them that they had been on an extraterrestrial craft and had viewed symbols on that craft, and they should sketch those symbols. And then there was another group of graduate students who were told to just imagine what alien writing might look like and sketch those on paper. They gave all of that, all mixed up, so that the graduate students had no idea the identity of anyone who had sketched those symbols. And at the end of the study, they found that Bud Hopkins experiencers had all sketched similar symbols, whereas the two groups of graduate students had sketched symbols that were completely unlike any of the symbols that Bud had collected. Well, Dr. Donderi saw the symbols in Captured that Betty had sketched, and he did a comparative analysis of those with the symbols he had collected from Bud's abductees. And in the end, he said that Betty's symbols were very, very similar to the symbols that Bud Hopkins had been collecting since 1975. And Betty had never seen those symbols. They were in Bud's house and Bud's file cabinets.
Good heavens.
So that's just another piece of
just validation.
Evidence. Yes. There are so many pieces of validation in this case. It's amazing.
You know, it's really startling to me that this does seem to be a universal phenomena, and that experiencers, such as described in this particular case, have such similar experiences, different types of things that come back that seem almost universal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've worked on 3, probably you'd call them major studies on experiencers. Mm-hmm. The first one had only 75 participants. 50 were experiencers and abduction experiencers, we call them. And there was a 25-person control group who denied ever having had this type of experience. The second one was the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation's study of 4,000 experiencers. There's another commonality study. I participated as a researcher and writer of the first questionnaire for free. I'm on their board of directors. Yes. And then we did the third study of 516 experiencers through the Mutual UFO Network. And Dr. Donderi was part of that study. He and I did this together. And initially, some members of our team helped out in devising questions. Well, Dr. Donderi administered a test called the American Personality Inventory, and it was developed and standardized to be able to identify experience or abductees. Actually, I want to say experiencer because that's the word that I use so frequently. But it would identify people who had UFO abduction syndrome as a separate group from those who were wannabes or simulators and those who were just members of the general population who might have just filled out that questionnaire in order to throw off our research. So they could say, well, your research isn't valid because there are just people out there like that. We had some trick questions on the survey.
Which was brilliant.
Oh, thank
just
you.
saying.
So we were able to pretty much weed out those individuals who were not on the up and up, you might say. And in the end, we did a comparative analysis of all of the experiencers who participated in the study, and also we compared that to those who had UFO abduction syndrome. So we took a good look at their responses, and we discovered that those with UFO abduction syndrome had certain characteristics at a much higher level statistically than those who were experiencers in general, either having positive or negative experiences. And some of those is very interesting, are the same characteristics that near-death experiencers have after they have the near-death experience. So
that is fascinating. I know.
Yes.
I know several people who have had near-death experiences. I was fortunate enough when I first started doing this work to interview Dr. Raymond Moody, and turned out that I have a friend who was in his original study group.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that these are so similar is quite startling.
Absolutely. It is. And it caused me to speculate. And I've talked to scientists about this speculation of mine. And that is when humans are taken to craft, and they're doing it differently now than they did with Betty and Barney, as far as we know from Betty's and Barney's memory. But they take experiencers so often now through solid surfaces, through closed windows or walls. And I wondered if the process used to energize the atoms, that atomic structure, so that it would be able to vibrate at such a high frequency that it would be able to interpenetrate through that solid surface, which must also be energized. If the consciousness or the soul of the human is separated from the physical body briefly, and then it comes back together, when the atomic structure is, I would assume, slowed down, lowered for the work that needs to be done on the craft.
That is fascinating.
I don't know if I'm correct on that, but I've received a lot of scientific support on that speculation. I think that might be what it is. But what we found is that 86% of the abductee group said that they had become more spiritual. 65% said they had become psychic. 91% said that they had become empathic, that they were now able to sense other people's emotions as if they were their own. Some of them had even become healers. They're able to heal or act as channels or facilitators of healing.
What percentage was that for the healers?
For the healers, I don't have that in front of me.
I thought you had said a number that I was...
I believe that it was about 75%.
Astounding.
91% were empathic.
Yes.
75% said that they have the sensation that something unseen is walking on their mattress when they lie down. The experiencers in general came back with a very different view of the world than they had previously. they looked beyond their daily lives, their families, their small communities, the tribal warfare that's been going on this planet for thousands of years, to view themselves as being part of something much larger. It changed them in so many ways that, to me, it's just remarkable.
The people that I have spoken with all feel that way. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, they're part of not really a collective, they're still individuals, but they're part of something much bigger than what is here.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that fascinating. But we are at the top of the hour. It is time for our news break, and you never know, maybe we'll find a little good news out there. We can always hope. We'll be back following this, and thank you so much for being here with us. I am Kat Hobson, host of Fate Mag Radio, and my guest is Kathleen Marden, and we will be right back.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Fallout over the Navy SEAL controversy is costing the Navy Secretary his job. The Pentagon says Defense Secretary Mark Esper today asked for the resignation of Navy Secretary Richard Spencer after losing confidence in him over the handling of the case of Navy SEAL Edward Gallagher, accused of war crimes in Iraq. He was acquitted on those charges, but he was convicted of posing with the corpse of a captive. The Navy reduced his rank over the case, but President Trump then ordered that to be returned to his rank. NPR's Tom Bowman has more.
And that set in motion the Navy deciding to move forward and convene a board that would remove his Trident pin. He's a Navy SEAL, and a coveted pin is worn by Navy SEALs. So that is the backdrop of all this. And tonight, I'm told by a senior defense official familiar with the case that Navy Secretary Richard Spencer wrote a letter to the president tonight saying, quote, "I hereby acknowledge my termination as United States Secretary of the Navy to be effective immediately."
NPR's Tom Bowman. Former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg is running for the Democratic presidential nomination. NPR's Laurel Walmsley has more.
In a statement, Mike Bloomberg said he was running to rebuild America and defeat President Trump, whom he says, quote, represents an existential threat to our country and our values. Bloomberg enters a crowded field of Democrats, and it's not clear that there is hunger for a white male billionaire in the race, though he will make the case that his centrist views will appeal to voters. The 77-year-old founded his eponymous financial news company in 1981, then served as mayor of New York City for 3 terms. Forbes ranks him the 9th richest person in the world, with an estimated fortune of more than $54 billion. Bloomberg says he won't accept donations and will self-fund his candidacy. He's reported to already be spending $34 million in TV ad time. As a late entrant to the race, his advisors have said he doesn't plan to campaign in the earliest voting states and will instead focus on Super Tuesday. Laurel Walmsley, NPR News, Washington.
Israel's prime minister led a cabinet meeting today, his first since being indicted. NPR's Daniel Estrin reports.
Netanyahu is accused of abusing his power to help wealthy businessmen and media moguls in exchange for cigars, champagne, and positive press. Netanyahu says he did nothing wrong and will not resign. Today he projected business as usual, talking about security concerns about Iran. Many senior members of Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party are staying silent about the indictment, but some Likud lawmakers are calling for party leadership primaries. One of them, Gideon Sa'ar, demands primaries be held within the next 2 weeks. He wants to unseat Netanyahu as head of the Likud party and then try to form a coalition government with centrist Benny Gantz. If a government isn't formed within several weeks, Israel will hold new national elections for the 3rd time in a year. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Jerusalem.
This is NPR. Police in Alabama have made an arrest in the shooting death of a popular sheriff. Troy Public Radio's Kyle Gassett reports Sheriff John Williams is being mourned by law enforcement and other officials across the state.
Police say they searched for 4 hours after Lowndes County Sheriff John Williams was shot and killed at a convenience store in Hayneville near Montgomery. Williams, who was known as Big John for his height, had been serving as sheriff since his election in 2010. Police report that the 18-year-old suspect was apprehended when he walked back to the crime scene with a firearm in his hand. Condolences have been pouring in, including from Alabama Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who called Williams a giant in law enforcement. In a statement, Governor Kay Ivey said Williams is a consummate professional and a pillar of his community. For NPR News, I'm Kyle Gassett in Montgomery.
The new class of Rhodes Scholars includes the first transgender woman selected for the prestigious program. Minorities make up the majority of the 32 scholars selected from 90 colleges and universities across the country. The scholars will start at least 2 years of paid study next fall at Oxford University in England. Rhodes Scholars are chosen not just for academic skill, but also for their leadership and a willingness to do good for the world. The cost of a gallon of gas is falling. The Lundberg survey shows the average cost of a gallon of regular is down 3 cents to $2.66 over the past 2 weeks. The highest price in the survey is in San Francisco at $3.89 a gallon. I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News in Washington.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Welcome back. You are listening to Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, and I am so pleased to be able to say I am welcoming Kathleen Marden tonight to the show. We have had a fantastic first hour, and if you've had to miss a segment of that, no worries. You can catch our archives just about anywhere. We are on iTunes, iHeartRadio. We are on Podcast Addict. We are YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, just about anywhere you want to be. So please, if you'd like to have an archive of this show, you're welcome to just download one. You can do that also in your Spreaker app if you're mobile. And Kathleen, welcome back.
Thank you.
You know, we were going over so many different statistics with your experiencer groups, the things that you found, and some of them take me aback.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 81% of people who are empathic when they weren't prior to this experience, it just shows that this isn't necessarily a negative thing. A lot of these are absolutely positive attributes that people come back with.
They absolutely are.
It builds a community.
It does. And you hear so often that these are horrible experiences, that people would want to make it stop if they possibly could. And that's one of the things that we looked into. And on Free Study, 80% said they would not want it to stop. On the Mutual UFO Network study, 71% would not want it to stop. And among the abductee group, 75% want it to continue. So it can't be that bad if
that's pretty astounding.
Wants it to continue. Yes.
To me, that is almost hard to believe. Because, you know, the negative people get the attention.
They do, because fear sells.
It does.
Unfortunately.
And if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
But something that I have found, without going into any detail, is that the majority of people I know who have experienced this have had nothing after the initial trepidation. It's scary as heck when it happens because they felt targeted or isolated. There wasn't anything they felt that they could really discuss with friends because people would think they were crazy. I do think that the things that you and your experiencer groups do are imperative.
That's why I do them. And that's why I wrote Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, because it's a comprehensive guide for people who are going through these experiences and want to know what to do. This book has chapters on coping strategies, on how to investigate your own experience, what to look for. If you're wondering, is this a dream or did it really happen? It has far more statistics than I just gave you. It has a chapter on social research studies on experiencers so that you'll know the overall findings of social researchers. It has a couple of chapters on the paranormal. It also has chapters on becoming more psychic and what to do if you want it to stop. Maybe you're having negative experiences. You're not one of that large group of individuals who are having more positive experiences. It gives some insight into what causes that and how to make it stop. And it gives many, many suggestions that have worked for others. And it also has a chapter on what to do if you're thinking about going public, what you should know. What if you want to write a book, what you should know about that. So it is a comprehensive guide, and each chapter has a workbook at the end of it, which people say is extremely helpful.
I found it to be extremely helpful. That was probably my favorite book that I have read so far this year. And that's saying a lot. I read a lot. So I do a lot of research for my shows. I read for enjoyment. I read for education. And this book was actually something that I think anyone could benefit from, whether you're just trying to get a feel for what people go through, if you're curious as to whether this may be something that you have experienced. Because sometimes it doesn't seem possible, or you're uncomfortable. It's a hard thing to share. It's a hard thing to accept that, well, maybe this is something I've been through. This is just astounding. I'm shocked. Or it takes nerve to come forward.
It does. And I do think that a lot of people are in denial. It can take years to actually accept that this is true. So many people would rather be mentally ill, because if they are, they can be treated. But
that's a good point.
You have to be very brave, I think, to go through this, to go through the struggle of understanding, of coping, to coming to terms with yourself being able to accept that, yes, this did happen to me. And, it took me about 50 years to talk about my own experience, and I still haven't in a lot of detail. But I found personally, in the early years, I didn't want to accept it as real. But I had so many experiences and interest, and I would have an experience and there would be witnesses to the craft. On 2 occasions, the craft was close to my home, and people were actually looking for me because they knew I had an interest in UFOs because of my aunt and uncle's abduction. And they weren't able to find me. Well, the obvious reason was because I was on that craft. I remembered being there. Not all of it, but I had snippets of memory. And for years, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't tell people. And then when I started to tell people in the UFO field, oftentimes they said it was only sleep paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
Or even though I didn't have those symptoms, they would want to completely wipe it off the slate and say it didn't happen without having any knowledge of anything I had been through, which was very harmful in a sense. It was for someone to be that incredulous who claimed to be a researcher in the field. And that's why I asked a couple of the questions that we asked on our survey. I asked about sleep paralysis. Have you ever felt that you were awake, yet you were paralyzed and only able to move your eyes? And 74% of the experiencers said yes, but 90% of the abductee group. And then the second question was, were you wide awake? Did you see non-human entities enter your environment? And then did you become paralyzed? Only 30% of the experiencer group said yes, but 60% of the abductee group had that happen. They were huge when they were taken. And I also discovered that this is generational. It runs along family genetic lines.
That's fascinating too.
Yes.
Do you know, one of the things that I learned in listening to experiencers who were lecturing, in the public lectures at different events that I've been to,
mm-hmm.
is that they're different. They're changed, obviously, from what happened to them, but the people that come forward and speak have just decided, you know what? It's just enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's time. I found it fascinating that I had spoken over a couple of years' time with people who had missing fetus syndrome,
mm-hmm.
I guess that's what it's called.
Yes.
And of the people that I spoke to that had experienced that, 2 different ones had seen their children
mm-hmm.
on Earth after they had matured.
Mm-hmm.
And in one case, they were allowed visits.
Oh, that's nice.
And I was blown away because I wasn't sure where I was coming from on this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I wasn't sure how much of a believer I was. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. And when that happened, the first time it was offered freely in a lecture.
Mm-hmm.
The second time, I asked privately and was not expecting the answer I got.
What was the answer you got?
Yes. I saw her.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it was by somebody that I personally consider to be very credible.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely trusted her sharing of her experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I asked, because I just felt that I knew this answer.
Mm-hmm.
But I was still blown away. There's so many different aspects. Oh, we're almost at our break. But there's so many different aspects of what experiencers go through.
True.
That, it's not just, well, hey, we're here to take you on your flight tonight. We're going to be doing this. But there's the traumatic side. Mm-hmm. There's the emotional side. There's the developing a rapport, almost like a Stockholm Syndrome, if you wanted to compare it to that, but I don't think it's as negative.
Mm-hmm.
And when we come back from this break, maybe we can delve into that a little bit. Are you game?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and take our first commercial break this hour. We will be right back with Kathleen Marden.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us, and we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back. We are at 23 minutes after the hour, and thank you so much for joining myself with Kathleen Marden here at Fate Mag Radio. We were discussing, all kinds of things. Before we move on, though, we have a question in chat that I think is relevant. And I know that we were talking about humans coming back from experiences as healers. But I have a friend who is convinced that she was healed due to her relationship with ETs. And the question in chat actually is, do you believe that aliens can heal humans? She jokes about it, but she's truly serious.
I know that they can. It's not a belief for me. I know that it's real. I wrote about, and in Extraterrestrial Contact, I wrote about several of the cases that I have investigated that had extraordinary things happen. And in one of those, it's a case that I've been working on since, I believe it's about 2012, 2013. And the man involved had a great deal of evidence that this was real, including having an implant removed, having a T-shirt that had changed color, all different kinds of things. But those two things went to a laboratory. But then he got into touch with me, and he was extremely distressed. He'd been diagnosed with lymphoma. And I said to him, well, first of all, do you believe in God? And he said, yes. And I said, well, pray. And I said, there's something else that I would like you to do. I know that it worked for me. I was healed by ETs. And I said, I'd like you to try this, and I will send them telepathic messages to please heal you as well. A few days later, before he went in for his surgery, he sent me a video. He was still awake at 1 o'clock in the morning, lying in his bed in his bedroom with his cell phone in his hand, when he saw an orb enter through his ceiling. He caught it as it was sliding down the wall. It slid to the floor, and then it lifted up, and it flew like a butterfly across the room. It was a beautiful white orb with a pale blue halo. And it hovered momentarily over his body, and little tendrils came out like little fingers. They were beautiful, iridescent, and they dove down into his body. He immediately fell asleep, and he slept for 12 hours. The next day, when he woke up, the very large nodes in his neck were no longer noticeable. He went in to the oncologist to have those nodes removed. And when they were removed, the lab report stated that there had removed 4 tiny necrotic nodes. They were no longer cancerous, as they were believed to have been previously. Dr. Joseph Birx has his medical records. I have some of those records. I've written about this in the book, and I have spoken about this at one of the conferences that I spoke at. Mm-hmm. Now, I had a different kind of healing. I had become extremely ill, as I had mentioned earlier. I ended up giving up my career as a result of this, and that's why I began writing. And 30 years ago, began my career as a writer and researcher. But my illness would wax and wane over the years. And that's why it took me so long, 14 years, just to write Captured. But when I started traveling, speaking across the nation, I would do that for a weekend, and then I would spend a week in bed with all of the symptoms returning. And I was having such a struggle with it that during the first study, I spoke with a man in Australia who was an experiencer who communicates with these non-humans. And I was able to speak with one of these via Skype, and I asked for healing. I had no idea if this man was delusional or what. I never expected this to happen. But 4 nights later, I woke up during the night with a very strong tingling sensation through my body. I was no longer in my room. I was on a table in an environment. I didn't know exactly where I was. I could see an image, and I'm not sure to this day if it was in my mind, if it was a holographic image, or if I was actually looking at a video kind of image. But the image showed an outline of a human body that I assumed was mine. And I could see something, almost like little circles, many of them moving around the periphery of my body. I could also see certain internal organs that were highlighted in pastel colors. And I knew that there were two entities near my head, and they seemed taller than the entities that I'd been accustomed to seeing. And it was almost as if they were glowing. The next thing I knew, I was back in my bed, and it was morning. And when I woke up, I felt like I was 25 years old again. It was so incredible. Not an ache in my body.
Wow.
This happened in 2012, and I have not had a relapse.
That's brilliant.
I feel so blessed that this happened to me, because the one obstacle that was standing in my way was this illness that I had, and now it's gone. It was healed that day.
Do you feel that this is because of relationships? Or do you think that would be available or a possibility for anyone? The individual that I know who was healed has a relationship with entities. She is able to, she says that she can communicate and she can call them. And I have not seen that, but I have no reason to doubt her. Because she's a rather interesting and pretty cool person in her own right. So, and this is something that she is known for other things. And when I approached her and said, hey, let's get together and have you back on the show, she said, well, let's talk about ETs this time. And I was like, well, okay. I had no idea the relationship that she had. And so that's why I'm asking, is this something that is relationship based because you're already interacting, do you feel? Or is this something that is available to the average person?
I have been told that it is relationship based. I've been told that they will heal their own.
That's what I have been told too. Okay. I find that interesting. Because that's not something that you hear discussed much.
That's true. That's true. There's a man in California who wrote a book about that. And there's also a chapter by him and Dr. Joseph Birx in Free's book, Beyond UFOs, The Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence.
That's an interesting organization.
It is. It's a small organization. It's more academically oriented. I love it. I really am extraordinarily interested in what Free is doing. The exploration of the science of consciousness. It's so important because that is what all of this is really about, in my opinion.
Completely. You know, I had a friend approach me that said, wouldn't you like to study noetic science? And I said, don't we already? You know, but, so I have started educating myself more strongly, you know, with more verve on the topic and doing experimentation, but Free is just an astounding group of people.
Yes, there are many individuals who are very well-known, renowned scientists with doctorates who are in that organization. It brings a level of intelligence that many other organizations don't have, a level of knowledge, sophistication, emotional adjustment, that sort of thing.
Well, and credibility, because these are people who are bringing true science to topics that are not often treated with that.
Very true.
And you cannot argue their credentials.
You can't.
It's brilliant.
It is brilliant.
And I like that you serve with them.
And I have a chapter in Free's book, too. It's on the history of communication with non-human intelligence.
You're pretty good at that.
I am. I've been doing it for a long time.
Yes,
and
you
I've
have.
Been personally experimenting with this kind of communication and being taught how to do it. So it's been very interesting.
Well, you certainly are never, ever boring. And your life isn't either.
That's true. I don't live a boring life, thank goodness.
I know, right?
And I hope my health stays with me for many, many years, because I would not want to be positioned in front of a television set all day.
I know, right? But, I just think that there's so many different aspects to this. When we went to break, we were discussing some of that. And what do you think? Oh, Sherry in chat said, oh no, she's absolutely not boring. Wow. So, validation. But when different people talk about experiences, and you find those that are just trying for the whole shock and awe or the shock and terror. They're trying to instill fear about every aspect of alien contact. We talked about one of them. That,
yes.
We're tastier when we're afraid. Okay? And I sit there and I hear this, and now this was said to me in all earnestness 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who said it and who has written about it was speaking at a major consciousness conference this year.
Mm.
And I saw that and I thought, surely not, But why, as you put it, why would you come all the way here just to eat us?
That is very true. How do you be so technologically advanced that you could travel through space to come to this planet and come here to eat humans? Gosh, if we taste that good, they could be raising them like cattle on their own planet. Why would they do that? It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
I think so too.
What I find is that in the cases that have been so horrific that I have investigated, those individuals have ended up having a form of mental illness. A lot of times it's a personality disorder that causes them to lie. It causes them to exaggerate everything for the thrill, for the excitement that it gives them. And then sometimes it's just been people with major mental illness who have just gone off their medication. And, they'll they'll let me know and they'll apologize after. But I have never heard these horrific stories from anyone who has a real case. I've heard of horrific fear. I've heard of the portal being open and demonic entities, what you might think of as demonic. Some people don't like that word, but negative parasitic entities coming through that interdimensional portal, along with ghost activity that hadn't been there before. The ET activity brought a lot of other things with it. But nothing as horrific as some people speak of. And I know that the man who had this happening, I wrote about him in the book too. He was a commercial pilot. He was a very credible individual who knew nothing about the topic until he had a sighting, and then became so interested he tried to call them in so that they could sit down and have a nice discussion together. That's not what happened. They came in closer and closer, and finally they took him, and he didn't like that at all. And then he had so much fear of this happening again that it really led to his downfall.
Oh dear.
And I was there picking up the pieces because every other researcher, investigator had abandoned him. And there I was, he had seen me on television and got in touch with me to begin to tell me his story.
Well, thank goodness he did.
Yes, thank goodness.
I mean, you can't live with that fear.
No.
It causes all kinds of other damage.
It does. And that's why it's so important for anyone, in my mind, who is having these events and is very fearful to have EMDR therapy, by a psychotherapist who is trained in doing this, because it's that rapid eye movement therapy, the type that is most effective in treating post-traumatic stress disorder. And it works with people with an extremely high level of anxiety and fear. And it helps to open up the mind so that you can see what happened, so you can acquire more information without having hypnosis. After you've done that, it's okay to go on and have a very kind and gentle kind of hypnosis if you want to know more. But I always recommend that very fearful people should have EMDR therapy first.
Well, that is good to know, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to take that to heart, because it is post-traumatic stress when they are dealing with that. But we are up against our final break, and we will be right back. Thank y'all so much for being here, and we'll see you in just a couple of minutes.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
To the believer, the evidence is overwhelming. To the skeptic, there will never be enough. Hello everyone. Join Kevin and Jennifer Malik, the host of Paraversal Universe, every Friday here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, also heard on WCET FM and The Rift. Log on or tune in as they check out the mysteries found within the 8 categories of the unknown and unexplained, including ghosts and haunted places, aliens and UFOs, theology and mythology, cryptids and monsters, urban legends and folklore, conspiracies, metaphysics, and forbidden archaeology. Listen as Kevin and Jennifer interview the top minds in their respective fields as they share theories and information regarding these unsolved mysteries. For future show and archive information, one can find Paraversal Universe on Facebook, Twitter, and MeWe under various Paraversal Universe headings. So, for excellent talk radio about the unknown and unexplained, check out Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply. Brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society, LTD, and produced by WBHM-DB.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to our final segment here on Fate Mag Radio with our guest, Kathleen Marden. And we do have another question in our Spreaker chat, Kathleen, if you're up for it.
Okay.
All right. Sherry would like to know, where do these aliens live? They have to have somewhere. They can't just fly around in their spaceships every day. You know, she's like, do they have a planet, or are they like spirits, or do they travel from other dimensions? Sherry is a paranormal investigator, so she doesn't really know if these are just dimensional.
Well, it appears that some of them are coming here from other star systems.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't just fly back and forth those very long distances. We know that sometimes they do go back to their home planet for a break or whatever. But it appears that they have bases underneath the ocean and at the bottoms of very large lakes like the Great Lakes too. And the reason I speculate about that is that they are seen so frequently coming out of those bodies of water. And there is a larger concentration of experiencers around those bodies of water as well. So I think that they do have underwater bases where they carry out their operations and just live quietly out of sight. There are some who are interdimensional, and some say that they live in the 5th or 6th dimension, and so they're vibrating at a higher frequency than we are. They say that life is easier for them living at that frequency, and that they can lower their vibration to become more solid if they want us to see them. So there are those. There are others that are, as I said earlier, these interdimensional parasitic entities, but they're coming, I believe, from the astral realm. Mm-hmm. So they're at a lower vibration. Although they're interdimensional, maybe just highly negative human spirits who, we think of as demons, who just come and attach to people and feed off their fear, their negativity. Many alcoholics have these types of attachments. Also, people who are addicted to opioids will develop these types of attachments, and it's terrible for them to have this happen. And some people who are empathic as well, they're just living normal lives, but they happen to be empathic, could be food for these entities briefly, but they either detach because the vibrational frequency is too high, or they need to be detached by like a shaman or a religious person who's able to do that. So I think that there are a lot of things going on. We talked about the type of reptilian that is very negative. And those are the types that have the tails and the kind of alligator type faces. There's another type of reptilian that people say they've had a positive relationship with,
Yes.
that it's been fine. But these these draconian reptilians are the ones who are shapeshifters. And they're the ones who treat humans very poorly. People who are taken generally to an underground place, like a cave or a tunnel under the ground, end up being raped. They talk about oftentimes how they see this beautiful looking human, man or woman, and they begin to have sex with that individual, and then it shapeshifts into this draconian. I'm not even sure. I don't think those are extraterrestrials. I don't think that extraterrestrials would behave that way. I think that they're probably interdimensional and negative.
I would agree with that.
I'm not positive. It's an area that I chose to stay away from for many years, as I focused on essentially the grays, the kinder reptilians, and then the human types as well. And I learned a great deal about those. And then I thought, gee, I really ought to take a good look at this other type, regardless of how negative it is. So I try to keep my distance, but to learn as much as I can from individuals at the same time. I don't learn any of my information by reading books that other people have written. I do my original research. That's the type of researcher I am.
That's why I admire you so.
Thank you.
That's a huge difference. People, it's very easy to take someone else's opinion and kind of, we see it all the time where it's just regurgitated under a different author and credit's not often given. And, these type of things happen. But one thing that I always admired about Stanton, one thing that I admire about you and so many others in this field is that you are out there doing the work. You are out there using the quantum healing hypnosis technique, which Dolores created.
Yes.
And you're actively helping. You're actively researching. You are bringing healing to people that are unsure of what to do next.
Yes.
Can I live with the knowledge? You help them get to where they can live with the knowledge when they're ready to. And I can't tell you how much I admire that also. It's a great gift to have the knowledge to heal someone and to help them heal themselves.
Yes, and I'm not healing them. I'm only facilitating the healing. It's the higher self that I'm able to access, and it is the higher self that moves into their body, speaks to me in the third person, and tells me what they need to work on, and when they're finished working on that particular part of the body in that healing process. And my body is tingling all over when that is taking place. It's pretty amazing, and I'm just, it's so gratifying to know that I am able to help people who have been having difficulties and who can go on and have a far more positive and productive life.
I think that's very awesome. And the more I learn about that practice, the more my mind is blown.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can well, that's a whole different show. but it is such a personal experience for you interacting with that level of a person's existence.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't even know that that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have to be a spiritual person.
Yes.
In order to do this. You can't, just come off Wall Street and begin doing that. It just, I don't think it would work. You have to have spiritual characteristics.
I agree. Just with what I've learned, and that's not that much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I love Sherry in our chat room. And she is who has asked several of the questions tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And she just wants to know how you feel about Bigfoot or any of these other urban legends. So
I do have friends and acquaintances who are very much into the search for Bigfoot. They tell me that there is some evidence that Bigfoot is real, but so many of these people do believe that Bigfoot is interdimensional as well, and that Bigfoot is associated with sightings of extraordinary craft.
Yes.
That does not appear to come from this planet. And so the two, there's an association between the two. And so, it's another one of these sort of dimensional things, I think. And so often portals open up when craft come in, or when craft come to take humans to craft. And a lot of times those portals either aren't closed, or maybe they open and close at various times. And we have different things that come through. And I wouldn't be surprised if Bigfoot is one of those things that comes through.
Well, I have heard someone that I know has researched all types of cryptids, alien experiences, paranormal experiences, who agrees that almost all of it is interdimensional. A large part of it is interdimensional, and that these portals are how things bounce in and out of our reality. I wouldn't doubt it.
Well, think about the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah.
Yes.
And how that giant dog, wolf, whatever it was that stood 5 feet tall, that's a prehistoric animal.
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared to have gone onto that ranch. And, the owners of that ranch, when it grabbed the calf, shot and shot and shot. They shot the skin off, or chunks of skin off that wolf, but it didn't kill it. It continued to remain alive, and it ran off eventually, and they tracked it. They followed it to one spot, and the footprints simply disappeared in that spot, indicating that, it was probably an interdimensional portal.
Mm-hmm.
In the case that I was talking about with the pilot that I wrote about in Extraterrestrial Contact, his family was beginning to think that he needed to see a psychiatrist. And so they went and they had a family meeting with him. And he said, just give me a chance to prove this is real. And his mother agreed to stay with him. And they looked out the window one night, and both of them saw not the runway of the airport, but a grassy savanna with mammoths grazing. So this has
gracious
something to do, with space and with time, time slips, interdimensional portals that also carry you maybe back and forward in time. It's so very complicated.
It is. And time slips are equally fascinating to portals.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really think most people have experienced those in some shape, form, or fashion.
Mm-hmm.
But do you know what? We're out of time.
Oh, my goodness.
I know.
This went by very rapidly.
Well, I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and I enjoyed it so much as well. Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll have to do this again sometime.
I'd be delighted.
Me too. And we're already getting those requests in chat, as a matter of fact. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining me and my brilliant guest, Kathleen. Again, you can check her website at www.kathleen-marden.com. You can find her books there. You can also find her on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any bookseller. And I'm going to tell you that any one of them is a brilliant read. The most recent one is Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. And it will change your outlook. It's brilliant. You'll learn a lot. And you will totally and completely not be bored as you're going through it. It's a great book. So again, thank you so much. Don't forget, be the change you want to see. There's so much negativity, and every day when we wake up, we get to choose what kind of day we're going to have. I know that sounds Pollyanna, but it's true. So, be the friends you'd like to have, be the change you want to see, and just get out there and rock your week. We will be back tomorrow night with Denise Pridemore on the Paranormal Pride. I'll be back Wednesday with Paranormal Experienced with my guest Robert Solomon. And we will be welcoming Kevin and Jennifer back on Friday with Paraversal Universe. I am so glad that they're going to be back. And then we will have Shelley Burke-Robertson's show, Ghost Talk Radio. Thank you again. Good night.